I still remember the first time I saw her. It wasn't one of those magical movie moments when everything slows down and the world disappears around you. It was quieter than that. Simpler. She was standing in line at a small coffee shop near my workplace, wearing this oversized beige sweater and holding a book pressed against her chest like it was something sacred. Her hair fell loosely over her shoulders, and there was this tiny, almost invisible smile curving her lips while she read something on her phone. I didn't know who she was, but somehow, I felt like I'd known her all my life. At that time, I was nobody. I mean, I worked hard, but my job barely paid enough to cover rent. I lived in a tiny apartment that smelled like instant noodles and cheap detergent. But still, I was proud of it. It was mine. I had built my life from the ground up after years of struggling, and I was finally starting to believe that maybe, someday, I'd have something better. What I didn't expect, was her. When she looked up from her phone, our eyes met. Just for a second. But it was like the world had forgotten how to breathe. I looked away first, pretending to focus on the menu, but inside, I felt something strange, something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. I saw her again a week later, at the same coffee shop. This time, she was sitting alone by the window, sunlight spilling across her face. I hesitated before walking up to her table, but then she looked up and smiled. "You again," she said softly, like she already knew me. I laughed awkwardly and said, "Guess we're both addicted to caffeine." She chuckled, and that was the beginning of everything. Her name was Claire. She was kind, quiet, and full of contradictions. She came from a family that seemed perfect, wealthy, respected, and utterly intimidating. Her father owned several businesses, her mother was a socialite who hosted charity events for people she didn't really care about, and her brother was the kind of guy who wore success like a suit he'd been born in. She was different, though. There was something about her that didn't fit that world. Maybe that's why she noticed me. We started talking more. At first, it was just casual, little moments between sips of coffee and laughter that filled the empty spaces in my day. But soon, she became the reason I woke up earlier, the reason I stayed at that coffee shop longer, hoping to see her again. One day, she asked me about my life, and I told her the truth, that I came from nothing. That my parents were gone, that I'd worked every odd job you could imagine, that I was still figuring things out. I expected her to walk away. But she didn't. She just smiled and said, "That's what makes you real." It was the first time someone said that to me. And maybe that's why I fell for her. Our first real date wasn't fancy. We went to a small park near the edge of the city, sat on a bench, and ate street food under the stars. I remember how she laughed with her whole body, how her eyes glowed when she told stories about her childhood dog, and how she leaned her head on my shoulder when the wind got cold. I wanted to freeze that night and live inside it forever. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about how much money I didn't have, or how broken my past was. I was just happy. But happiness, I learned, is fragile. It started with whispers. Her friends, those perfectly dressed people who looked at me like I was a stain on her designer dress, started asking questions. Who is he? What does he do? Why him? And soon, those whispers reached her family. The first time I met her parents, I wore my best shirt. It wasn't expensive, but I ironed it 3 times and practiced my handshake in front of the mirror. I was nervous, but hopeful. Claire had told me not to worry, that they'd like me once they got to know who I really was. She was wrong. Her father looked at me like I was invisible. Her mother smiled politely, but her eyes said everything her words didn't. They didn't ask about my job, my dreams, or my life. They only asked about my intentions. It wasn't a conversation, it was an interrogation. When dinner ended, her father pulled her aside in the hallway. I didn't mean to overhear, but I did. His voice was low but sharp. "He's not your kind, Claire. People like him, they don't last. You're playing with fire." And then, the words that burned through my chest. He'll only hold you back. I walked home alone that night. The city lights blurred behind my tears, and for the first time, I wondered if they were right. If love really wasn't enough. But she proved me wrong the next day. She showed up at my door, out of breath and furious. I don't care what they think, she said. I know who you are. That was the moment I knew she loved me, not in a fairy tale way, but in the kind of way that's messy and real and terrifying. We tried to keep our relationship private after that. We went on late-night drives, took walks by the river, cooked instant noodles in my kitchen, and talked about everything. About the future we wanted but couldn't see yet. About the people who'd never understand. About the simple life we could build, just the two of us. Still, the pressure never stopped. Her friends began to distance themselves. Her family tightened their control. There were days she came to me crying, saying she couldn't take the constant judgment anymore. And every time, I told her, we'll figure it out. We always do. But part of me was scared that someday, she'd wake up and realize I'd never fit into her world. And then it happened. Her father gave her an ultimatum. If she didn't end things with me, he'd cut her off completely, no money, no support, no family. She called me that night, her voice trembling. I don't know what to do, she whispered. I love you, but I can't lose everything. And I understood. I told her to do what she needed to do, even if that meant walking away. I wanted her to choose freedom, even if it meant I'd lose her. We ended things quietly, without a fight. She cried in my arms for what felt like hours, then walked away before I could change my mind. I stood there watching her disappear into the rain, feeling like my world was ending. Days turned into weeks. I threw myself into work, tried to forget her, but everything reminded me of her. The coffee shop. The bench in the park. The sound of rain on my window. I'd wake up reaching for her, only to remember she wasn't there anymore. That's when I heard the rumors. People said she'd gone back to her old life, that she was traveling, attending parties, smiling beside people who belonged in her world. It hurt to imagine her happy without me. But deep down, I didn't believe it. I knew her heart too well. One night, months later, I was closing up at work when I saw a familiar figure standing outside. It was raining again, just like the night she left. Her hair was soaked, her eyes swollen, but she smiled when she saw me. I couldn't do it, she said. I tried to live without you. I can't. I pulled her into my arms, and for a moment, everything made sense again. But love isn't just about reunion, it's about endurance. The months that followed were the hardest of our lives. She'd moved out of her family's home and rented a tiny apartment with peeling walls and a broken heater. We shared everything, the struggles, the bills, the sleepless nights. There were times when we had nothing but a cup of soup between us, yet we were happier than we'd ever been. Because it was real. It was ours. Still, the world didn't stop judging. People talked behind our backs. Some of my co-workers avoided me, whispering that I was living off her. Her old friends mocked her choices, saying she'd thrown her life away for love that wouldn't last. Every insult cut deep, but we learned to laugh through the pain. We built a life out of fragments. Out of love and stubbornness and late-night promises whispered under flickering light. There was one night I'll never forget. She came home from work exhausted, dropped her bag, and sat beside me on the couch. We didn't talk for a while. Then she looked at me and said, "Do you think we'll make it?" I took her hand, looked into her eyes, and said, "Everyone said we wouldn't work out, remember? So let's prove them wrong." She smiled, and in that moment, I realized that love isn't about the world believing in you. It's about believing in each other when no one else does. But sometimes, believing isn't enough to stop what life throws at you. It was around that time that things started to change again. She began working longer hours. I noticed she was more tired, quieter, distracted. When I asked, she brushed it off, said she was fine. But one night, she collapsed in the kitchen. I caught her before she hit the floor. We spent the night in the hospital, the fluorescent lights buzzing above us. The doctor said it was stress, exhaustion, malnutrition. She's been pushing herself too hard, he said. She needs rest. I wanted to scream, because I knew why she was pushing so hard. She wanted to prove to everyone that she didn't need her family, that she could survive without their money, without their name. But in trying to prove that, she was destroying herself. That night, I sat beside her hospital bed, holding her hand while she slept. Her face looked pale and fragile, her fingers cold in mine. I whispered, "You don't have to prove anything to anyone. You already proved it to me." And I think, somewhere in her sleep, she heard me. Because when she woke up the next morning, she smiled for the first time in weeks and said, "Then let's just live." For us. After she left the hospital, everything changed. Something inside both of us shifted. Maybe it was the fear of losing what we'd fought so hard for. Maybe it was realizing that love isn't about proving anything, it's about surviving together, even when the world wants to see you fall apart. We moved into a new apartment a few weeks later. It was still small, but it had sunlight in the mornings and the smell of fresh paint. We bought second-hand furniture, laughed while trying to assemble it, and argued about where to put the couch. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. It felt like a new beginning, one that we had built with our own hands. I started picking up more freelance work to help with expenses. Long nights, short pay, but every time I came home and saw her waiting for me with that tired but genuine smile, it made everything worth it. We didn't have much, but we had peace. And for a while, peace was enough. One Sunday morning, she sat across from me at the breakfast table, flipping through an old photo album she'd brought from her parents' house. There were pictures of her childhood, fancy dresses, big birthday parties, smiling faces that didn't look real anymore. Then she stopped at one photo of her and her father. Her smile faded. "I miss him," she whispered. "Not the man he is now. The man he used to be." I didn't know what to say. I reached across the table, took her hand, and said, "Maybe one day he'll see what you see." She nodded, but her eyes told me she didn't believe it. A few months passed, and slowly, our lives began to stabilize. We both found better jobs. We started saving a little money. For the first time, we could go out to dinner without calculating every dollar. And sometimes, late at night, we'd sit on the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, watching the city lights flicker below us. Those were the moments I knew we'd made it this far, not because of luck, but because we refused to give up. But life, as always, wasn't done testing us. One night, I got a call from her mother. I hadn't heard her voice in years, and even through the phone, she sounded colder than the winter wind. "Claire's father isn't well," she said. "He's asking for her." My heart sank. When I told Claire, she froze. For a long moment, she just stared at me. Then she whispered, "After everything he said to us, why now?" Still, she went. Because that's who she was, someone who forgave even when she was the one who'd been hurt the most. I drove her to her parents' house, that enormous mansion we'd both sworn never to step foot in again. As we pulled up the long driveway, she squeezed my hand so tightly I thought she might break. "I'm scared," she said. "Not of seeing him, but of losing myself again." I kissed her hand. "You won't. Not this time." When we walked inside, her mother greeted us with that same polite smile I remembered, though now it carried the weight of years and regret. Her father was in the study, sitting in a chair by the window. He looked smaller somehow, older, weaker. His eyes softened when he saw her. For a long time, no one spoke. Then, he said the words I never thought I'd hear. "I was wrong." The silence that followed was heavy. He looked at me, then back at her. "I thought I was protecting you. But all I did was push you away from the only person who truly cared for you." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't want your apology," she said softly. "I just want peace." He nodded. "Then take it. I have nothing left to give but that." We left that house different people. She didn't say much on the way home, but when we got inside, she sat down on the floor, pulled me close, and whispered, "I finally feel free." From that day, something blossomed between us again, something lighter, calmer. We'd been through so much darkness that we'd forgotten what peace felt like. And now, it was finally here. Time moved on. We got married in a small ceremony at the park where we'd had our first date. No guests from her family, just a few close friends and the hum of summer air around us. She wore a simple white dress, and I could barely breathe when I saw her walking toward me. As we exchanged vows, I looked at her and realized that every hardship, every tear, every sleepless night had led us here. To this exact moment. To her. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," I did, and it felt like the whole world disappeared. After that, life wasn't suddenly perfect. We still had bills to pay, jobs to juggle, and arguments that made the walls shake. But love, real love, was there. It stayed. It healed. It grew. A year later, we decided to start our own little business, a small design studio combining her creativity with my work in marketing. We poured every ounce of ourselves into it. Long hours, endless nights, but when our first project succeeded, we celebrated with cheap champagne on the balcony, laughing until we cried. We didn't need the world's approval anymore. Because we had built our own. Sometimes I'd catch her staring at me while we worked, her eyes full of that same spark from the coffee shop years ago. "What are you looking at?" I'd ask. "You," she'd say. "You still don't believe how far we've come, do you?" And she was right. I didn't. Because even now, part of me still remembered those early days, the whispers, the doubts, the fear. And yet here we were, standing in the middle of a life we built from nothing but love and persistence. But love has a way of testing you, even when you think you've won. It was a cold evening when everything shifted again. She came home later than usual, her hands trembling. "I got a call," she said. "It's about my dad. He had passed away in his sleep." For a moment, she just stood there, staring at the floor. Then she broke. I held her as she cried, feeling her pain as if it were my own. And in that moment, I realized something powerful: sometimes forgiveness comes too late for words, but never too late for love. We attended the funeral together. Her mother thanked me quietly for being there. And though grief hung heavy in the air, I could feel something else: respect. Acceptance. It wasn't the world's validation we had sought all those years ago, but it was closure. When we came back home, she sat beside me, wrapped in silence. Then she looked at me with tears still glistening in her eyes and whispered, "You were my choice every single time. Even when I was scared. Even when it hurt." I smiled and kissed her forehead. "And I'd choose you again. In every lifetime." Years passed. We grew older, wiser. We built a life out of laughter, love, and lessons learned the hard way. Our little business became successful, nothing extravagant, but enough to live comfortably. Sometimes, when we drive past that old coffee shop, we'd stop for a cup and sit by the window like we used to, talking about how it all began. One day, she asked me, "Do you ever think about how different things would have been if we'd listened to them?" I looked at her and said, "Then we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be us." She smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "Then I'm glad we didn't listen. We learned that love doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers through the smallest moments, the way she'd fall asleep with her head on my chest, the way she'd hum while cooking breakfast, the way our hands would find each other without trying. Those were the moments that mattered. Not the approval. Not the perfection. Just us. Even now, when I look back, I can still hear their voices, everyone who said we wouldn't make it. Their doubts used to echo like thunder in my mind. But now, they sound distant, harmless. Because in the end, love isn't about proving people wrong. It's about proving to yourself that it was always worth it. We had our share of storms, of nights when we thought the light would never come. But we learned to dance in the rain, to find warmth in each other's arms, to keep choosing love no matter how hard the world tried to pull us apart. And maybe that's what makes our story different. Not that we survived the odds, but that we did it together, hand in hand, heart against heart, never letting go. Sometimes, I think back to that first day in the coffee shop. The shy smile, the smell of coffee, the nervous heartbeat. I had no idea then that she'd become my entire world. That the girl with the book in her hands would one day hold my whole life in hers. Now, when people ask how we did it, how we stayed together despite everything, I just smile. Because the answer isn't simple. It wasn't luck. It wasn't fate. It was choice. Every single day, we chose each other. And if I had to do it all over again, the pain, the judgment, the long nights of doubt, I would. 1,000 times over. Because every scar, every fight, every tear brought me closer to the only thing that ever truly mattered. Her. We were never perfect. But we were real. And in a world full of fleeting things, being real is the most beautiful kind of forever. They said we wouldn't last. They said love like ours was foolish, fragile, destined to break. But they were wrong. Because love isn't measured by the approval of others, it's written in the quiet choices, the sacrifices no one sees, the courage to stay when everything tells you to run. We faced the storm, and we walked through it together. Now, when I look at her, I see everything we fought for reflected in her eyes. Everyone said we wouldn't work out. But we did. And in the end, that's all that ever mattered.